Thanks very much for coming today. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I really want to thank the State Government Department for giving me this opportunity. One of the reasons why I'm really honoured to be here is that a kid, I grew up in Melbourne, and I used to look at the Cricket Australia program, and I always wondered, where is Lilac Hill? Because the touring teams would come in and they'd send them to Lilac Hill, and there was really that nostalgia, and I really thought one day maybe I might live close there, go to visit there, and I didn't think that I'd have the opportunity to spend 11 years in the area that nostalgic ground was for me as a child growing up. So thank you for the opportunity. My talk today is about expertise and skill learning, and I'm really passionate about this area, and hopefully you can get something about the implications for training in terms of perception, action, instruction, feedback, and how it transfers. I thought I'd start with, where did my passion for this area come from? And it came from these athletes. So as a kid, I grew up watching the great Viv Richards, and then I would tune in as a kid to watch Curtly Ambrose take 7 for 1 at the WACA, and I always loved watching the Prince from Trinidad. And of course I'd tune in, to watch the Eagles play after the cricket was over. And of course I loved watching Carlton and watching Steffi Graf play, and then I just wanted to highlight some of the iconic moment here of the wicket being taken by of Brian Lara, which is sort of an iconic moment for an athlete from Western Australia. What is how important is this field, and how has it developed over the last 10 years? These are some examples of the interest growing in the area of skill acquisition, skill learning, and in particular, sports psychology. Okay, these are some of the books that have been written in the last 10 to 15 years. So you may know some of this. David Epstein's book on the sports gene, talks about things like deliberate practice, nature versus nurture, and things that related to perception, action. And then there's a book by Leonard Zakowski, which talks about the importance of skills related to the brain. So anticipation, decision making, which I'll talk a little bit about. And then his newest book, Range, which talks about beyond deliberate practice, which many of you would have heard about. He talks about diversification, sampling different sports and how important that is for athletic performance. So one of the things he talks about there is Tiger Woods and how he specialised early, but Roger Federer sampled a variety of sports. Several other books have been written. I had the opportunity to contribute a chapter to anticipation and decision making in sport. Professor Mark Williams and Robin Jackson from the UK. So that specialises and talks about anticipation. There's other books on sport and the brain, which talked about psychological factors of athletic performance, but also perception and action. And then I assume everyone would know Anders Ericsson with the deliberate practice approach, wrote a book across a variety of different fields in terms of in law enforcement, surgery, in the medical profession, in sport, how experts develop their skills to be able to perform. As I go through, if you have any questions, by the way, I'm happy to take it as a discussion, but of course there'll be an opportunity at the end to ask further questions and discuss. So I thought, before I continue any further, what is the field of expertise? That's the first thing you might be thinking. So I've tried to categorise it this way. It really relates to what I call perceptual motor skill. So what is the term perceptual? It means meaning in your environment. If you're playing tennis, is the athlete, your opponent, putting top spin, side spin, etc. on the ball, right? That's the perceptual component. And I'll talk about some of those cues in a minute. The motor component is the action, right? How you respond, what type of motor pattern, coordination pattern that is required to achieve the goal in that particular sport. And that varies across sports. I will try to use examples from a variety of different sports to cater to obviously the audience here, but obviously I'm not by no means an expert in every single sport. So two components of that is the sport expertise area. It's to understand exceptional performance. So why is Steve Smith averaging 65 or close to 70? Okay, what are the factors that allow him to perceive and act in that way? What differentiates the emerging expert coming through those ranks? What differentiates those test players from under 15 or under 17 players? And then skill acquisition is the other arm, or motor learning. Okay, what are the evidence-based learning factors that relate to retention and transfer of perceptual motor skills from the context that you practice it to the context that you perform in? So that's the field. Now, I'm only talking about a few topics today, but there are a whole host of topics that relate to you to some degree in the way you might interact with the athlete, assess them, select them, train them. And these are all some really hot topics. I thought it's important to bring that to you. So I'll be talking about anticipation, decision making, practice design, feedback and instruction. But there are other factors here, interdisciplinary factors. Okay, how does physiology interact with perception and decision making? Okay, and psychology. Those are important, interacting together to be able to assess and develop the athlete. And Ben Piggott's here, his work was integral in that area in the last few years with WAFL football. There are other topics here, psychological factors. Okay, so how emotional regulation and performance of the skill under pressure. Developmental pathways. Do you specialise early? Is there a need to specialise early? Can you engage in the primary sport that the athlete wants to develop in and have a bit of diversification as well? Or can you sample? Okay, that relates to talent identification, talent development. Technology is a huge topic. Is VR of value? How can it be used? Okay, can you use video simulation instead? Those type of technologies are discussed in the literature. Transfer is another topic. Do you have to specialise in a position in your team? Always. Can you transfer from a specialised position in hockey or soccer and play in another position as a strategic advantage? Between sport transfer. Okay, talent transfer is a hot topic in Australia. Can you play football and then go into basketball, or basketball to football? We know that that happens to developing athletic skill. This is another very important one if you're developing talent, the relative age effect. Those who are bigger and taller, who are born earlier in the calendar year, tend to get selected more. So you need to be aware of that. How much you give opportunities to a broader population group interested in being participation. Cognition and skill automaticity. Okay? Does the skill need to be fully automatic? And does that mean you're a better expert? Okay? Do you need to, can you have explicit conscious knowledge, and can that help you adapt in your environment? So maybe a mixture. So anyway, I'm just trying to give you a big snapshot. I can't talk about all those today, but certainly if there's interest after this, I'm happy to discuss those further. So the order of my presentation today is to talk first, what are the factors that differentiate expertise? In particular, anticipation and decision making. Can you train it? Is the second point. And then I'll switch to how do you, when you're practicing a motor skill, what are some of the instructional, feedback and design things you need to think about? So first, factors that discriminate expertise. How can you assess this? How can you identify talent? But firstly, what do elite athletes say about anticipation? And here's some examples. So here's Paolo Maldini, played for Italy, okay? Played on the late Maradona, Zinedine Zidane. And here's his quote: "If I have to make a tackle, then I've already made a mistake." So what he's suggesting is reading the offensive structure, the pattern of play, and he's trying to get to the ball before he has to dispose of it from the forward. So expert athletes regard anticipation as being important. Here's another example from Wayne Gretzky, played for Canada in the National Hockey League. "I skate to where the puck is going to be, not to where it has been." Right, again, talking about reading the patterns of play and trying to get into position to gain time and then go from a defensive to an offensive position. Next, an example from a graduate student of mine, Kaya Morris-Buleni, who just did his, submitted his thesis, and his project was with the Kookaburras and the Hockeyroos. And essentially what we did here was we asked them, how important are these sports psychology and expertise skills to saving the penalty corner? And they said they're vitally important. What's important about it? Well, the psychological aspects, such as regulating emotion, to cope with anxiety, is important. The perceptual and motor, the two terms I talked about, pickup of cues, the contextual information that I'll show you in a minute, the setup of the offensive structure in the penalty corner for the drag flick, and motor components. So even these current athletes from Western Australia and from other parts of Australia believe that these skills are vital for high performance. So it's important to develop them. So let's take a little bit further. What do I mean by anticipation? Well, it's about selectively attending. Okay, and you can see an example here of Murali, who came to Western Australia many years ago. Okay, and you can see there he's trying to bowl the off break, and he obviously had the doosra as well. So there are some cues that he's presenting, different body cues there, and the main cues there. He's trying to disguise it within the main cue. So there's multiple bits of information in the environment. And as a batsman in that situation, you can't attend to all the information, you can't attend to the deceptive information, or you're going to play the wrong stroke. So information needs to be filtered, okay, to guide motor skills. And this allows pickup of visual cues to be able to anticipate. And what anticipation means is pick up cues to allow you to get into position earlier and gain time. And this is where experts give that apparent perception of having all the time in the world, okay? When you're watching, the commentators say that, oh, Steve Meach, he gets into position early and he's really quick on his feet. And what we attribute to that is the key element of anticipation. Why is it important? We'll take an example from sports such as cricket batting and baseball, but the time delays in most sports are very fast. So in the top panel, you think about, for example, a cricket batter's movements, back lift, the feet movement, the downswing is about 900 milliseconds. But from ball release to bat ball contact can be significantly less than that, about 500 milliseconds. So that's across tennis, it's across baseball, cricket, even decision making in field-based sports. So you have to gain that time. You're losing time here because your response time is quite high, your reaction and movement time is high. The movements of the opponent or the ball is very quick, so you need to get information before you just see the object in flight. So you need to be able to anticipate. If you're playing tennis and you're facing a really fast serve, you need to be able to read the ball toss, where they're positioned on the court, to be able to move into position first. And then you use later information from ball flight to be able to intercept. Okay, and same if you're playing cricket, for example. Read the bowler's action, are they bowling a full or a short ball, and then use ball flight to be able to strike. So I think of it as like a two-stage process. You're trying to get, if you're playing a field sport, you're trying to see the patterns of where to run. And as they get close to you, you've got to intercept somehow. You've got to tackle, you've got to dispose of the ball. So that concept can be applied across different sports. So early and late information. So how do we assess this? So I can set the scene for you here. Australia's won the toss. It's Lords. The score is 2 for 20, and you're about to walk out the bat, and you're about to face Jofra Archer. Is it going to be full or short? You tell me. What's that? Are you going forward, playing defensive, or are you going back? Oh, that's a short ball, Ben. So that's one way we can assess perceptual skill and anticipation. You can feel the opponent, and I managed to get a clip from some ECB website and cut that footage, and that's probably one of the fastest bowlers in the world at the moment, Jofra Archer. So in my early work, what we used was temporal occlusion. So we filmed the bowler, this was up in Queensland, And we did a similar thing, and this is a first-class bowler. So in this example, you're a batsman, a right-handed batsman standing on the crease. When the screen goes black, you've got to predict is it going right or left, outswing or inswing. It's going to your inswing to your left, or you're going outswing to your right. Have another look. Inswing, yeah, inswinger. So this is, you can see with that type of test, can be done fairly quickly. Of course, you need more trials, but this is the type of data you get. So this is the percent, 100% there. This is back foot impact in the bowler's action, front foot impact, ball release. This is the points where the footage was stopped, right? At different points it was stopped, and no occlusion is where you can see all of the ball flight. And yeah, I tested highly skilled players, intermediates, and less skilled. So the highly skilled players were Australian Test batsmen. These were players who played in 2002, 2003 teams for Australia. So hopefully, if you're familiar, you'd know who played in those teams. Intermediates were club, and lesser skilled were novices, like myself. So ball release is what I want you to focus on. You can see here that the test level players up around that 70%, club level players getting close to that. That line represents that I'm just guessing, and the novices are well below that line. So if you get close to that line, no good. You're not going to know whether it's full or short. Probably cop it in the head or somewhere. So you can see there we can understand by occluding that footage at ball release with a video test. This information here is what we know as advanced information before the ball is in flight. That's how batsmen gain time to get into position, and they look like they have all the time in the world. So that's the opponent's action, right? The opponent's movement pattern. But cues come from a variety of different sources, right? So again, a cricket and tennis example. They come from contextual cues as well. So example here, if you're going to this field, you're thinking where they're going to bowl to me. It's probably going to be outside off stump, you'd think. So the score, the field placing, the action tendencies of the opponent. Okay, so field placing, contextual cues in tennis, depending on where they stand. Okay, court positioning can tell you about what type of service information, what type of serve is going to be delivered. So those are some of the contextual visual cues. This you get before the movement pattern, okay, of the opponent that you're playing against. You can also get, and what seems to be popular is that contextual cues seem to be now given by analysts, right? This player does this in this situation. This is non-visual cues. This is before you get to actually facing the opponent. So you've got an example of Ronaldo there, and this was a really interesting study by Jackson. And what he did was he basically showed clips to athletes in a soccer situation where someone would run at them and step to the right, okay, genuine movement, or step to the left, okay, and then on other clips they would do what's called a step over. Someone would know a step over, and they'd take the ball to the opposite direction, so a deceptive movement. And he gave them the likelihood of them either going left or right for the genuine action or the deceptive action. And here is some of that data, right? And what they had to say was, did they predict the right direction correctly for the genuine action or the deceptive action? The interesting part about this data, and it's got highly skilled and low skilled here, is that for the genuine movements, okay, as you gave this probability information, as they got the likelihood of them going left or right, that didn't really, you can see their performance was really good there, but when the opponent was deceiving them, it made them less accurate, particularly the lower skilled, but also the high skilled. So the implication from there is you need to be very careful how much information an analyst might be giving the athlete before they get to the actual performance setting, and really make sure that they can pick up the actual contextual cues and the opponent's movement pattern in that instant when they're performing. Temporal occlusion can be used in a variety of different ways. Okay, this bit of work I did with Perth Heat. We couldn't capture, we couldn't ask a bowler to come in, or a pitcher in this situation, to come and pitch in a choreographed setting. So we went out to the ballpark and captured it during the actual performance, during competition. Okay, so when it occludes, you've got to predict, and what they were required to predict is it a fast ball, is it a curve ball, is it a change-up? Okay, fast ball goes flat, curve ball has a loop, and a change-up's a slower pitch. Okay, so you can capture and create temporal occlusion in the actual performance context as well. And this is some of the data, right? Again, percent correct here, and this is where the footage was occluded. This is one I want you to focus on, point of ball release. There's the still image of what it looks like. The interesting thing about this, and this was data with some were from the Major League, the batters were perceiving this from the Major League, and also minor league in the United States. What we did here is we had an expert group and a near expert group, so Major League, AAA level, professional, and then single A, which was more the minor league. So expert, near expert, again there, but we had right-handed pitchers and left-handed pitchers in this sequence. And that's where it gets really interesting, that you can see here at the point of ball release, their prediction of pitch type is better for the right-hander than it is for the left-hander, right? So there's quite a bit of data on that showing that left-handers are hard to predict because there are few of them in developmental pathways, and more of them tend to get through into the higher levels and they're more successful at the elite level. So that can be used to screen different opponents, and then you can do some training to help athletes who are not perceiving right and left hand as well. And I'll show you how you can do that. You might be asking, well, if I want to know where cues are coming from, what sort of manipulation, how can I find that out? You know, yeah, which is it from the hand, is it from the body, etc. This is a manipulation called spatial occlusion, where you remove certain body parts and you show others and you ask them to predict. So you've got to watch carefully because there's not a lot in this field of view. Okay, so I'll show that again. It's just the cricket baller's hand and ball, and you've got to predict whether it's going right or left. And you can add information to that, right? You can add the hand and the arm and then predict from there. And we had a different condition where you just had the head, the torso, and nothing else, and just running in and bowling, right? So you can combine them to get an idea of where's this information coming from. And this is the type of data you get, right? Percent scale. Again, these are test batsmen, club, novice. This is what I want you to focus on, the bowling hand and arm. You can see a clear difference there between novices, intermediate, club, international level, right? So these factors are discriminating, right? So batsmen like Steve Waugh will get, you know, in the other test, the temporal occlusion will get close to 90% correct on the full and short. How else can we manipulate this? What else has been done in this area? Well, another tool that this has been adapted to is what's called a point light display. So I showed you the clip of the picture, the 2D image of the picture. You can create point light displays to test whether they're reading the movement pattern more closely. So this is, the dots are static, doesn't look like anything at the moment, but when it starts playing, it's a pitcher's action. Now that's the level of fine-grained perceptual information that the expert picks up on at that level, the signature of the movement pattern. That can be developed and easily used and tested with athletes. Okay, so I've talked a lot about perception, and you're thinking these are verbal responses simulated. So one of the things that we did to understand, can, for example, perception be linked to action, right? So can, for example, a batter read information from the bowler's action and actually move into position to hit? So what we did was we put these special glasses on the batter, fully padded up, See, these glasses are clear at the moment. Helmet, it's linked to a harness there, and it has a receiver. I've got the laptop, and I trigger that button, and the vision of the batsman goes completely opaque. They can't see anything. It's clear at the moment. I'll just show you what that looks like. So it'll go grey, and you can see that it can still hit the ball with no vision of majority of its ball flight. Okay. Okay, so what that is saying is, based on the information I told you before, that cues are present in an action, in an opponent's movement pattern, that they indeed can use that when perception and action are linked together. And the perception and movement pattern are together, they can read that information and can get into position. So we know that that actually happens in the field, and that helps validate what we did in the video. Yep.
What point did you turn the...
So this was, yeah, good question. So this was just in, they saw a little bit of ball flight, but they saw a little bit in this example, but in other studies it was no ball flight at all. So state players can get on the back foot if it's a short ball or forward by seeing none of the ball flight. Good question. So I wanted to do a demonstration on that. Would someone like to come up and catch a ball with the glasses? Right? Yeah, go. That blocked out?
Yep.
Just one sec. Yep. And go again. Right. So that's a really good example, even though you dropped it. You can see there that without complete ball flight, you can still get the hand into position. The movement pattern's still pretty much the same. Go again. Okay, that was very early, but again, you can the point made there. That was an early occlusion, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, much earlier. But you can see the movement pattern's not being inhibited, and he's going into position. That's what it's all about in terms of cues to action. One more. There you go. That was very early, right? Well done. Thanks for that. Thank you. Okay, so that's a little bit about anticipation, but I want to also talk about decision making. So decision making, the skill of decision making is a slight nuance difference there, and you can think here about basketball, soccer, Australian football, water polo, all those types of things. And essentially it's about playing field sport. It might be a 2-on-2 type of situation or pattern evolving, and you've got to decide, say in Australian football, to kick, run, hand pass, whatever it might be. Okay, by reading the pattern that evolves from further away, and then it gets close to you, it's maybe a 2-on-2 situation. So you've got to read, but you still got to anticipate what happens. So this is kind of what has been used, and it's called the pattern recall paradigm. When it stops, usually the screen goes black, and the task will be on a scale representation of a footy field to say in that quick snapshot where the defensive and offensive players. Okay? Now, the elite Australian footballers can tell you that where they are in very close proximity. This player, you probably mark it here. Oh, this player was here. And they can also tell you where they're going to. So they're reading the pattern in the future. The pattern's here, the player's part of that pattern is here, and they're moving towards there. That's why I need to run with the ball or kick. What do we know about decision making and reading patterns? So this was a really interesting study where done in basketball, and they just show them the footage like that, and they had to make a decision. They'd see the footage pattern evolve, and they had to make a decision, drive to the basket, take a shot, etc. And they showed it in this display, and the choices they made were better than guessing, easily, because you can see the whole thing. But then they manipulated where you could only see the focal vision. Or they couldn't see focal, and they could only see peripheral vision. And what the experts could do is that they could use, of course, the normal, but they could use both focal and peripheral vision to read the pattern to make a decision better than guessing level. So that means you're not just randomly making a choice, you are based on the structure of this pattern, reading it out of peripheral vision to be able to anticipate. Now what we know is that peripheral vision is vital. Okay, there's a lot of discussion about focal, tracking the objects, tracking opponents, etc. But what we know is what really differentiates athletes is the better use of peripheral vision. It's faster and it's more at a subconscious level. Okay, so that's a lot of video stuff, but some nice work by Derek Panchuk has taken this into head-mounted displays, into VR. And this is a basketball example. And essentially you put a GoPro on athletes, they played a simulated game, captured that footage, you manipulated, put it back into a head-mounted display and then showed it to these athletes. Right? And in this situation, it was captured by a 360-degree camera. So now they have the opportunity to look around the environment, okay, and search for that information and then make a decision, a simulated movement. Of course, they can't run with it. You're in sort of a confined area, but now you can turn to look, where is my opponents, to make that decision. So head-mounted displays might be another option as well, video and virtual reality. Okay, so I want to move now. Any questions on that before I keep going?
With the basketball structure and the decision about driving or not, with the AFL, when it was just looking like the TV view of the pitch and people were asked to recreate where the players were positioned.
Yep.
Did you look at sort of people that have watched a lot of AFL, not necessarily high-level players, but people who have watched the game a lot and what their results were like?
Yeah, it's a good question. That hasn't been looked at in terms of pattern recognition and decision making. They wanted to know what differentiated expert Australian footballers from near experts and less skilled. So they wanted to know whether the advantage was in reading, knowing where your own teammates are, or knowing where the opposition was. Good question. So can you train anticipation? And why I keep coming back to anticipation is that decision making and anticipation, they go hand in hand, whether in striking sports and open field play sports. Because of the time constraints, whether it's footy or whether it's cricket, you need to anticipate a direct opponent like cricket, or you need to read the pattern and then anticipate how that pattern's evolving in Australian football or soccer. So the topics or those terms are interchangeable and important across different sports. So how might you train this? And this was an interesting study done by John. Where is he? John Brenton over there is my ex-student. We did this with WACA. We explored a couple of concepts here. So I showed you the video test of that bowler running in. We did that as a baseline assessment before and after. And then we had 3 groups. Okay? One group was just what we call a control group. We just didn't do any training that we gave them. They were just tested and retested on that video occlusion test. The first group got what we call occlusion training, and I'll show you what happened there. They basically watched the bowler on the screen. When it occluded, they played a shot and they got feedback. And we use point light displays as the training method. So this is perception-based training. So here's an example. So you can tell me whether it's going right or left. In swing? Yep. Here's the feedback trial. Yeah, in swing. Good. So they did that type of point light perception training. Okay, the second group did a really interesting thing. They did the same perceptual point light display training, but immediately after they got the feedback, we told them to bowl the delivery in a modified net of what they just saw. So go out now, here's the ball, and go and practice that motor pattern of what you just perceived. And interestingly, what we found was this group had some improvement, but this got the most improvement, where they practiced bowling. These were, and just to clarify, these were specialist batsmen practicing to bowl, helped them perceive the bowler better. And the result was that they transferred their improved anticipation skill against fast bowlers, which have a distinct movement pattern, and also to spin bowlers. So there's some really interesting messages here that you can take away for a variety of sports. the first thing is, you might be thinking, why am I using point light displays? Why am I using these dots? Why not something really sharp that looks really clear? Well, here's a good anecdote. Steph Curry, the MVP in the NBA, well, about a year and a half ago, he got contact lenses. Before that, he'd been performing with not high visual acuity, and he was at the height of elite performance. So he's performing in a blurred visual field, or a toned down, if you like, situation, similar to that point light display. And that's what the point light display taps into, the peripheral vision, the subconscious. So he's able to maintain that level of performance at that high level. So you can use point light displays in different ways. I showed you just the base point light display, but you could use colour to highlight it. Hopefully you can see the colour now being put on the wrist of this pitcher, and then the ball coming out, just to draw their attention to the curve ball and the fast ball. Okay, so you can manipulate them in different ways. You can speed them up, you can slow them down. The other implication of the study where they practiced the bowling to help them perceive the batter has implications for a variety of different sports. It suggests that as the performer, so think about the field hockey goalkeeper, if they're trying to read the drag flicker, you might suggest in certain practice sessions that those goalkeepers go out and practice drag flicking to help them perceive the drag flicker. Okay, sounds weird, sounds the complete opposite way, but what I'm suggesting is train perception, and you can also train action. Same with goal kicking. Go take the free kicks. Basketball, play in the different position that you're trying to read and understand. Play in that and then come back to the position. Right? And similarly in Australian football. Have some of those findings transferred is the other question you might be asking, right? So we did a similar training, just the perception side of it, with very elite cricket batsmen, just the point light training this time. And we looked at that and we said, does that transfer actual competition performance? And this was the paper that John, one of the final papers in his thesis that John submitted and published. Is there transfer to competition performance? And what we found was that indeed there's some indication that this is happening to competition performance. So one group got that perception and motor practice training, and the other was just a control group, okay, that did no others. And these were batsmen who played in the WACA competition, played for the Warriors, so they were very skilled. And that's called the visual motor training, and there's the control group. What we saw was that before the season, their batting average was here. During the training, okay, the batting average went up and then returned back, whereas the control group stayed quite flat. So there's some suggestion that there might be something happening there of value to competition. Now, quite a bit of work needs to be done in that field, to be honest. And there are a variety of factors. So, at this stage, I can't hang my hat on the fact that transfer is definitely happening, but there's some indication that it is there. This is another bit of work looking at transfer of anticipation training, and this was done with the Kookaburras, okay, the Kookaburras goalkeepers. And one of the things that these athletes wanted is they wanted to train against the opponents that they face in international competition or in local competition. So what we did was we put a GoPro on the top of the crossbar at Perth Hockey Stadium, captured that footage, occluded it, and used it as a training tool. And this is what it looks like. Okay, and you got the goalkeeper's there, it's on the screen, and you got to predict where it's going in terms of the goal location, and then you get a feedback trial, okay. Okay, so you can see there. So the goalkeeper would have predicted hopefully this side at least, and then they would have got a full feedback trial as to where it actually was. So these athletes were very engaged in that process because they could now face their opposition and train against their opposition prior to actual competition. And what we did was we wanted to see, is there a transfer to the actual field test? So the actual penalty corner situation. So we had them the injector drag flick to the drag flicker and take the shot on goal. And these are the 6 different options they could take a shot on goal to. And what we found was actually from a baseline measure before training and after training that actually helped some of those goalkeepers actually save. So what I'm building here is that you can train your perception skills and that can transfer to actual motor skills. So it's improved save performance. It helps some of them in a measure where they were getting closer to the ball from before training to after training. And then importantly, we worked with the analyst to give us data about where these shots on goal were in competition, such as the World Cup. And what we found in this little graph over here, and this is save percentage, before the training, you can see 2 of the goalkeepers. We did a baseline before, and you can see their performance there. The training was in between, and then we did a retest, and we had some improvement in their performance. Again, suggesting that there's some value to this into actual competition, but more work needs to be done. Okay, any questions before I finish up on the last part? Anyone not clear about? No? Okay, so in this final part, I've talked a lot about perception, decision making is one part, which is important, and action. What I want to talk about here is instruction, feedback, and practice structure. So one of the hot topics is explicit and implicit learning. So this is the golf swing. These are all the different cues that can be provided in the golf swing. Now, if you think about it as a coach, if you're giving all that information, what happens to the athlete when they get to the tee? Right? Explicit learning is very quick. And what I want to say here is there is a blend between explicit and implicit learning. I'm not suggesting that you don't speak to the athlete or don't communicate. It's about how much you give. Right? But this is the type of thing. You can see the angle of the club, where to put your feet, how to hold it, all those things. When they get to the tee, they're thinking about those cues in components, which can break down the skill and cause choking. So what are some of the alternatives to minimise that? To minimise, not to cut it out completely. These are some of the techniques that can be used. So implicit learning and skill automaticity. The first one is by masters and colleagues, okay? And this is analogy learning. So in tennis, they've talked about striking up a hypotenuse of a triangle. There are creative ways that as a coach you can come up with to create analogies or a metaphor that encapsulates the movement pattern so you don't have to give the detailed step-by-step components that you saw in the explicit golf example. So you get it to 1 or 2 key points. The other is to think about using internal and external focus. So internal focus would be, if in the basketball situation is, am I thinking about my movement pattern as I'm dribbling? Right? And I get to take a shot. Am I thinking about my elbow, shoulder, etc., where my position, my feet are? That's an internal focus. Or external focus, more on the outcome. What type of trajectory do I want in the shot? What type of loop do I want on the ball when I'm passing to achieve that goal? And what the literature suggests is that as you become more skilled, the external focus tends to be better and breaks down less under pressure. The third component is multitasking. How do you develop a dual task? What we want is skills that are to a degree automatic, right? So one of the things masters and colleagues are doing is, as these athletes are performing the skills, whether it be putting a golf ball, playing table tennis or whatever it might be, baseball, there's a low pitch tone and a high pitch tone continuously on a loop. And as they're performing their primary skill, they've got to verbally report when the high pitch tone sounds. And that develops their capability to automatize the primary skill of performing the task and be able to accommodate, have spare capacity for the secondary task of when that tone sounds. Now, why that's important is if you're playing soccer, you need to read the pattern of play, look at where your opponents are, and have your primary skill fairly automatic to be able to execute. The next part's on feedback. Feedback's very important. There are two types of feedback: knowledge of results. Okay, so the dive example, how did you enter the water, for example, and the water polo example in terms of knowledge of performance, how is your throwing action? Those are vital to improve and change skill. What you need to keep in mind is that giving that type of information on every single trial can put the athlete into an internal focus or an explicit type learning, right? As a result, by giving too much feedback as a coach, you can put them into a state where the skill may break down. So the alternatives are to use what we call a bandwidth. Think about a range, of an acceptable range that they could play with or they could perform with. If they go outside their range in the throwing pattern, then you give feedback. Okay, a bandwidth or a range. Think about reduced frequency. It should not be on 100% on every single trial. Maybe a 50% is suitable. What does the athlete want? One of the big things about motor learning is autonomy support for improving skill. That means the athlete self-selects what they would want feedback on. Do they actually want it in every second trial or third trial? Maybe they don't want it at all. Maybe they want it as summary at the end. Okay, let's talk about what happened. Here it is. We captured it. Here's a couple of clips. And that's maybe enough in terms of knowledge of results and performance. A final practice variable is known as variability of practice. Okay, and I've seen this a lot in terms of the sports I've been involved with in cricket and baseball, where, and this is obviously a soccer example, where you'll be just one skill and it'll be repeated continuously to get an ideal movement pattern. So you do that skill first and then you do the next one and so forth, and you continue. And what the studies show is that if you use variable, so use that same skill and you change it in a slightly different manner from one situation to the next, okay, overall it's that same skill, but just adapted into its variation of execution, not the exact repetition of it, you get better learning and you get better transfer. If you randomize the practice, now you're bringing the different types of skills from that category, okay, kick, dribble, and you vary that up. Again, you get more learning and you get better transfer than just doing repetitive practice alone. That doesn't mean don't do this, okay? That doesn't mean don't do this, just don't make it, a main part of each session. If the athlete is more towards the intermediate end, yes, you can start with that. If they're more at the elite end, you need more variable and random practice to develop their skill further. And it's really what's happening there from a psychological level is that every time they perform, so you might do 3 trials of this, every time they perform, they're testing the movement pattern in their brain. They're almost rehearsing it in their brain and then having to pick it up from one trial to the next. And that level of rehearsal to change to rehearsal is where consolidation of the movement pattern happens. Now, what you need to also keep in mind is this is quite challenging. It's going to look messy. They're going to fail. It's not going to be the beautiful forehand, straight into, the opposition's court. You're going to miss a lot, but really that's the part of the learning process, is to be able to miss and to succeed with it, not always succeeding, always missing. And that's the key part of the motor learning structure. Okay, so just to finish on, the teams that I've worked with want to improve athletic skill, and we all want to be able to do that and develop our athletes and be good coaches and practitioners. But I think it's important to think of this model. Can scientists such as myself work with coaches, high performance staff, and before you go down the quick pathway of I'll use anything or whatever might be there to player development, can you try to think of what are the scientific evidence that I've provided today and others have provided that have been tested in laboratory studies or applied studies, and use that as the pathway, if you like, for skill development. And there's a group of us, Ben and John are here and some others that have got going in Perth, a sports psychology and a skill expertise group, where we meet monthly and we discuss that. And for the last 2 years, we've been running this seminar, which was really well attended at the Wacker Ground in March this year, and we're running it again next year. So if you're interested, come to that and discuss, listen. The topics are going to be broader into sports psychology, skill learning, interdisciplinary factors. And hopefully that then stimulates you again to be able to apply evidence-based information to develop your athletes. So thank you. I'm happy to take some questions, and really what I've said today is about from the grassroots, even though at my house there's no grass, it's fake, but we still have a lot of fun in there. It's from the young level to the intermediate to the elite level athlete. So thank you for your time today, and thanks for coming and listening.